Welcome to Nightmare House of Horror. Step into the shadows where 3 tales of terror await, each one a different doorway into the darkness that lurks beneath our everyday world. Tonight, we present The Inheritance of Fear, a collection that will make you question every legacy left behind, every gift received, and every trust placed in those who claim to care. What do we truly inherit from those who came before us? Sometimes it's not precious heirlooms or cherished memories. Sometimes, the dead leave behind something far more sinister: their pain, their unfinished business, and their desperate hunger to touch the living world once more. In our first tale, The Digital Haunting, discover what happens when technology becomes a bridge between life and death, and family photos reveal horrifying truths. Then journey into the inherited grief, where a Victorian house holds more than just memories. It preserves every final moment of agony within its walls. Finally, witness the Nightshift Nurse, where the murdered dead refuse to rest until justice is served, no matter the cost. These stories are crafted to seep into your mind like a slow poison, corrupting the familiar spaces around you. They'll make you think twice before looking at old photographs, stepping into inherited homes, or trusting those who care for the vulnerable. So dim the lights, settle in, and prepare to discover what fear looks like when it's passed down through generations. But remember, some inheritances can never be refused, and once you've accepted them, they become part of you forever. The dead are waiting, and they have so much to share. Maya had always been the family's unofficial archivist. While her cousins groaned through mandatory photo sessions at reunions, she was the one crouched behind the camera, capturing moments that others were too busy living to notice. So when grandmother Elena passed at 93, leaving behind a house full of memories and mysteries, it seemed natural that Maya would inherit the old Dell Laptopa dinosaur from 2003 that Elena had somehow kept running through sheer stubbornness and WD-40. The laptop sat on Maya's kitchen table for 3 weeks before she finally powered it on. The funeral arrangements, the estate paperwork, the slow process of dismantling a life lived across nearly a century of it had consumed her days. But on that rainy Thursday evening, when the silence in her apartment felt too heavy to bear, she pressed the power button and waited for the ancient machine to wheeze to life. The desktop background was a photo from last Christmas, the whole family crowded around Elena's dining table, their faces flushed with wine and laughter. Maya remembered taking that picture, remembered how Elena had insisted on wearing her good pearls even though the clasp had been broken for months. She'd held them against her throat with one arthritic hand while smiling at the camera, determined to look dignified in what would turn out to be her final Christmas portrait. The photo folder contained decades of digital memories, organized with the meticulous care that Elena had once applied to her physical photo albums. Folders labeled by year, by holiday, my grandchild's birthday. Maya clicked through them randomly, letting nostalgia wash over her in waves. Here was her own high school graduation, her wedding day, the first photos of her daughter Emma when she was still red-faced and wrinkled. Here were camping trips and birthday parties, Sunday dinners and impromptu visits. She was deep in a folder from 2018, smiling at a photo of Elena teaching Emma to knit, when something caught her eye. In the corner of the image, barely visible through the kitchen window, was a face, not clearly defined, just a pale smudge against the glass, but unmistakably there. Maya leaned closer to the screen, squinting at the pixels. It looked like someone had been watching them from outside, but she couldn't remember anyone being there that day. She clicked to the next photo, Emma's 10th birthday party. The living room was full of children and cake and chaos, but there in the reflection of the television screen was that same pale face, watching from somewhere behind the camera's position. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She'd been the photographer at that party, she would have noticed if someone had been standing behind her. The next photo made her breath catch. It was from just 2 months ago, taken at Elena's 93rd birthday celebration. The family was gathered around the hospital bed that had been moved into the living room, everyone trying to smile despite the oxygen tank and the obvious frailty of the birthday girl. But there, pressed against the window behind them, was a face that Maya recognized with sick certainty. It was Elena herself. But not the Elena who had been lying in that bed, barely conscious and struggling to breathe. This was Elena's corpse, the face Maya had seen in the casket, waxy and still, eyes sunken into dark hollows. The corpse was outside the window, looking in at her own birthday party, her dead mouth slightly open as if trying to speak. Maya's hands shook as she clicked through more photos. There she was again, Elena's decomposing face in the reflection of a mirror during last Thanksgiving, her skeletal fingers visible at the edge of a Christmas morning photo, her rotting form standing in doorways and lurking in shadows, always watching, always trying to get closer to the living. The realization hit Maya like a physical blow. These weren't old photos. The timestamp showed they'd been taken within the last week, since Elena's death, since the funeral. She called her sister Jessica, trying to keep her voice steady. "Jess, I'm looking through Grandma's photos, and I think there might be something wrong with the camera. Are you getting any weird images on your phone?" "Weird, how?" Jessica's voice was distant, distracted. Maya could hear her nephew crying in the background. "Just check your recent photos. Look for anything strange." A pause, then Jessica's sharp intake of breath. "Maya, what the hell is this? There's a photo here from yesterday Tommy's at the playground, but there's someone in the background. Someone who looks like..." She trailed off. "Like Grandma. That's impossible. Maya, that's impossible." But Maya was already scrolling through more photos, her heart pounding as she saw the truth spreading across the screen. Elena's corpse was in dozens of images now, appearing in photos taken by different family members, in different locations, at different times, always decomposing a little more, always reaching toward the living. In a photo from 3 days ago, taken on Maya's own phone during Emma's soccer game, Elena's rotting hand was visible at the edge of the frame, stretched toward Emma's running form. The flesh was gray and peeling, the fingernails black with decay. In another, taken by Maya's cousin during a family dinner, Elena's decomposing face was pressed against the restaurant window, her dead eyes fixed on the children at the table. Maya's phone buzzed with incoming texts from other family members. Her Aunt Sarah, "Maya, call me right now. Something's wrong with my photos." Her cousin Mike, "What kind of sick joke is this?" Her Uncle David, "My camera's been taking pictures by itself. Check your phone." She opened her own photo gallery with trembling fingers. The most recent image had been taken 20 minutes ago, automatically uploaded from her phone's camera. It showed her own living room, empty except for the laptop glowing on the kitchen table. But there, crawling across the floor toward the camera, was Elena's corpse. Her grandmother's body was more decayed than in the earlier photos, patches of exposed bone visible through the gray flesh, her burial dress torn and stained with grave dirt. But she was moving, dragging herself across the floor with determination that death hadn't diminished. Maya spun around to look at her living room, but it was empty, just shadows and silence. Yet when she looked back at the phone, there was another photo, taken moments after the first. Elena's corpse was closer now, her skeletal hand reaching up toward the camera lens, her mouth open in a silent scream. The laptop screen flickered, and suddenly Maya was looking at a live feed her own kitchen, viewed from the laptop's camera. She could see herself sitting at the table, phone in hand, face pale with terror. But she could also see Elena's corpse pulling itself across the floor behind her, leaving a trail of decomposing flesh on the hardwood. Maya turned around again, but there was nothing there. Only in the digital realm did her grandmother's corpse exist, crawling through cameras and screens, desperate to touch the living world she'd been forced to leave behind. Her phone buzzed with a new photo. This one showed Emma's bedroom, taken from the camera on her daughter's tablet. Elena's rotting corpse was standing beside the bed where Emma slept, her skeletal hand hovering inches from the girl's face. The expression on Elena's decomposing features was one of desperate longing, as if she were trying to absorb the warmth of living flesh through proximity alone. Maya called Emma's name, but heard only silence from the bedroom. She ran down the hall and burst through the door to find Emma sleeping peacefully, undisturbed. But when Maya looked at the tablet on the nightstand, the screen showed Elena's corpse now pressed against the camera, her dead face filling the frame, her mouth moving as if she were trying to communicate something urgent. The photos were multiplying now, appearing faster than Maya could process them. Elena's corpse in every camera in the house, in every connected device, in every reflective surface that could capture an image. She was trying to break through, to push herself from the digital realm into the physical world where warm flesh waited for her cold touch. Maya's laptop screen went black, then displayed a single message in text that looked like it had been typed by arthritic fingers. So cold, need warmth, need touch, help me. The message was followed by a photo Maya had never seen before, Elena's corpse from the perspective of the grave, looking up through 6 feet of dirt at the sky above. Her dead eyes reflecting an intelligence that death hadn't extinguished. She was aware, she was suffering, and she was learning to navigate the digital pathways that connected every camera, every phone, every device that could see. Maya's phone rang. The caller ID showed Elena's name, even though the phone had been buried with her. Maya? The voice was a whisper, crackling with static and the wetness of decomposition. Maya, I'm so cold. I need to feel warm again. I need to touch you. Maya ended the call, but immediately received a video message. It showed Elena's corpse in the cemetery, filmed from underground, her body writhing in the confines of the casket. Dirt poured from her mouth as she tried to speak, her skeletal fingers clawing at the satin lining. I can see you, Elena's voice crackled through the phone's speaker. All of you, through every camera, every screen. I'm learning to move through them. Soon I'll be able to touch you. Soon I'll be warm again. The video ended, replaced by a live feed from Maya's kitchen. Elena's corpse was there now, standing behind Maya's chair, her decomposing hands reaching toward Maya's shoulders. But when Maya spun around, she saw nothing but empty air. You can't see me yet, Elena's voice continued through the phone. But I'm there. I'm learning to be there. The digital realm is just the beginning. Soon I'll remember how to be flesh again. Soon I'll remember how to be warm. Maya's laptop screen flickered again, showing a montage of photos, Elena's corpse in every room of every family member's house, always reaching, always trying to touch the living. In some photos, she was more solid than in others, as if she were learning to manifest more fully through the digital pathways. The phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Emma's number. Mommy? Emma's voice was small, frightened. Mommy, great. Grandma's in my room. She's in the mirror. She's trying to talk to me. Maya ran to Emma's room, where she found her daughter standing in front of the full-length mirror, tears streaming down her face. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and within its depths, Elena's corpse was visible, her mouth moving in urgent, silent communication. She says she's cold, Emma whispered. She says she wants to hug me. She says she wants to feel warm again. Maya pulled Emma away from the mirror, but the child continued to stare at the reflective surface. She's following us, Mommy. She's in every picture. She's in every screen. She's learning to be everywhere at once. As if in response to Emma's words, every device in the house began to glow. Phones, tablets, laptops, the smart TV, even the digital clock on the microwave, all of them displayed the same image. Elena's corpse, more solid now, more present. reaching out with desperate hunger toward the warmth of living flesh. Maya understood with crystalline clarity that her grandmother's death had been only the beginning. Elena had found a way to exist in the spaces between pixels, to crawl through fiber optic cables and wireless signals, to inhabit every camera and every screen. She was building herself a new kind of body, one made of digital information and desperate longing. And she was learning to touch the world again. The photos kept coming, each one showing Elena's corpse closer, more solid, more real. Soon, Maya realized the distinction between digital and physical would blur beyond recognition. Soon, Elena would remember how to be flesh. Soon, she would remember how to be warm. And she would never let her family feel cold again. The laptop screen displayed one final message. Almost there, almost warm, almost touching, almost home. Maya closed her eyes, but she could still see Elena's corpse in the darkness behind her eyelids, crawling through the digital realm toward the warmth of living flesh, learning to exist in the spaces between what was real and what was possible. The camera clicked again, capturing the moment when Maya finally understood that death was no longer the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new kind of haunting. Rebecca had always been drawn to old houses the way some people are drawn to stray cats, with a mixture of pity and inexplicable affection. So when Aunt Millicent died at 78, leaving behind a sprawling Victorian that had been in the family for 6 generations, Rebecca didn't hesitate to accept the inheritance. Her friends called her crazy for taking on such a money pit, but they didn't understand the pull of history, the romance of crown molding and original hardwood floors. The house on Elm Street had been built in 1847, a testament to Gothic revival architecture with its pointed arches and decorative barge boards. It was the kind of house that demanded respect, that seemed to watch you from its tall windows as you approached. Rebecca had visited it countless times during her childhood, but living there would be different. She would become part of its story, another link in the chain of women who had walked its halls and climbed its stairs. The move-in process was smooth enough. Rebecca's possessions looked small and modern, scattered throughout the grand rooms, but she told herself that was temporary. She would grow into the space, fill it with life and laughter the way her aunt had. The first few nights were peaceful, marked only by the expected creaks and settling sounds of an old house adjusting to new occupancy. It was on the 4th night that Rebecca experienced her first death. She woke at 3:17 a.m. with the sensation of drowning. Her lungs were filling with fluid, thick and warm, making each breath a struggle. She sat up in bed, gasping, her hands clutching at her throat as if she could somehow clear the obstruction. The feeling was so vivid, so terrifying, that she stumbled to the bathroom and turned on the light, expecting to see blood or foam on her lips. But her reflection showed only her own face, flushed with panic but otherwise normal. She could breathe. Her lungs were clear. Yet the sensation lingered, the memory of suffocation, of drowning from within while her body betrayed her with each labored breath. She made herself a cup of tea and sat in the kitchen until dawn, telling herself it had been a nightmare, stress from the move, anxiety about living alone in such a large house. By morning, she had almost convinced herself it was nothing more than her subconscious working through the grief of losing her aunt. But the next night, it happened again. This time, the sensation was different. A crushing weight pressed down on her chest, as if someone were sitting on her ribcage. Her heart hammered against her ribs in an irregular rhythm, skipping beats, then racing to catch up. The pain was enormous, radiating down her left arm and up into her jaw. She lay in bed, unable to move, experiencing every terrifying moment of a massive heart attack. When it finally passed, Rebecca was drenched in sweat and shaking. She checked her pulse steady and normal. She pressed her palm against her chest, feeling the regular rhythm of her own healthy heart. But the memory of the pain remained, as vivid as if it had been her own experience. The 3rd night brought a new horror. This time, she felt poison spreading through her system like liquid fire, her stomach cramped and twisted, sending waves of nausea through her body. She could taste copper in her mouth, feel her organs shutting down one by one. The sensation was so intense that she actually vomited, though nothing came up but bile. It was then that Rebecca began to understand. These weren't nightmares or anxiety attacks. They were memories, death memories. And they were happening in chronological order, working backward through time. She spent the next day in the local library, researching the history of her family's house. The records were fragmented, stored in various archives and newspaper morgues, but gradually a pattern emerged. The house had seen more than its share of death over the past century and a half. Natural deaths, mostly, but deaths nonetheless, and they were all there in the historical record, waiting to be discovered. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, 1987, died of pulmonary edema at age 67, lungs filled with fluid, drowned in her own bed. Mr. James Whitmore, 1982, massive myocardial infarction at age 71, found by his wife, clutching his chest in the master bedroom. Mrs. Sarah Whitmore, 1934, died of arsenic poisoning at age 45. Her husband was never charged, though suspicion lingered. The names went on, each one corresponding to a death that Rebecca had experienced firsthand. She was living through their final moments, feeling their pain, their fear, their confusion as life slipped away. The house wasn't just containing their memories, it was forcing her to relive them, to become a vessel for their suffering. That night, Rebecca tried to stay awake, but exhaustion eventually claimed her. She woke to the sensation of her throat closing, her airway swelling shut. She was experiencing an allergic reaction so severe that breathing became impossible. Her body convulsed as it fought for oxygen, and she could feel her heart beginning to fail from the lack of circulation. When the episode passed, she found herself on the floor beside her bed, gasping for air that her body no longer needed. The death had been complete, final, but somehow she had survived it. She was becoming a living repository for the house's collection of final moments. The next morning, she found Aunt Millicent's journals in the attic, dozens of leather-bound volumes, dating back to the day she'd moved into the house as a young bride. The early entries were cheerful, full of plans for renovations and hosting dinner parties, but as the years progressed, the tone changed. "I experienced Mrs. Whitmore's death again last night," read one entry from 1963. "The arsenic poisoning. It never gets easier. I've learned to recognize the signs, the metallic taste, the burning in my stomach. I try to prepare myself, but how do you prepare for death?" Another entry from 1971. "I've been keeping a list of all the deaths I've experienced, 27 so far. Some I've lived through multiple times, as if the house wants to ensure I remember every detail. I've begun to wonder if this is why Mother never spoke of her time here, why she seemed so sad in her final years." The journals revealed a pattern that stretched back generations. Every woman who had lived in the house had experienced the same phenomenon. They had all become vessels for the accumulated grief of the place, their bodies serving as a bridge between the living and the dead. "I understand now," read one of Millicent's later entries. "The house isn't haunted in the traditional sense. It's a reservoir of pain. Every death that occurs within these walls becomes part of its foundation, and those of us who live here become its memory keepers, ensuring that no one's final moments are forgotten." Rebecca read through the journals with growing horror, recognizing her own recent experiences in her aunt's descriptions. The drowning sensation, the heart attack, the poisoning. Millicent had lived through them all, over and over, for 50 years. "The worst part," read another entry, "isn't the physical pain, it's the emotional weight. You carry their fear, their regrets, their desperate desire to live. You become them in those final moments, and something of them remains with you always." That night, Rebecca tried to sleep in the living room, hoping that distance from the bedrooms might provide some relief. But the house's memory was not confined to specific rooms. At 2:43 a.m., she felt the familiar sensation of dissolution beginning in her extremities. Her fingers went numb, then her hands, then her arms. The cold spread through her body like spilled water, and she realized she was experiencing hypothermia. She lived through the slow death of Emma Whitmore, age 31, who had frozen to death in the winter of 1889 when the heating system failed, and she was too weak from influenza to leave her bed. Rebecca felt her body temperature dropping degree by degree, felt her heart rate slowing, felt consciousness slipping away like a candle being gradually extinguished. When she woke, she was curled in a fetal position on the couch, shivering despite the warm September night. But the cold she had experienced was different from ordinary physical cold. It was the cold of ending, of systems shutting down, of life draining away. It was the cold that preceded absolute stillness. The deaths came faster now, as if the house sensed her growing understanding and wanted to accelerate the process. She experienced consumption, drowning, falls down the stairs, complications from childbirth. Each death was complete, authentic, horrifying. She felt the tuberculosis patient's lungs dissolving, the drowning victim's desperate struggle for air, the mother's body failing as she bled out after delivering a stillborn child. But worse than the physical sensations were the emotional ones. Each death brought with it a lifetime of memories, regrets, and unfinished business. She felt the tuberculosis patient's despair at leaving young children behind. She experienced the drowning victim's panic as he realized he would never see his wife again. She carried the weight of the dying mother's grief for the child she would never hold. Rebecca began to understand why her aunt had become increasingly reclusive in her final years. How could you live a normal life when you were constantly carrying the final moments of dozens of other people? How could you find joy when you were intimately acquainted with so many varieties of suffering? The house was generous with its collection of deaths. It shared them all, holding nothing back. Rebecca experienced the Civil War soldier who died of infection in the makeshift hospital the house had become. She felt the slow starvation of the elderly woman who had been forgotten by her family during the Great Depression. She lived through the suicide of the young man who had hanged himself in the attic after returning from the trenches of World War I. Each death left its mark on her. She began to recognize the warning signs: the subtle shift in temperature, the way sound seemed to muffle, the strange tingling that preceded each episode. She tried to prepare herself, but preparation was impossible. How do you prepare to die over and over again? She found herself changing in ways that went beyond the nightly experiences. During the day, she would catch herself moving like an old woman, her joints stiff from arthritis she had never had. Her appetite decreased as her body remembered the nausea of various illnesses. She began to understand the expression she had seen on her aunt's face in those final years, the look of someone who had seen too much, who carried too much, who had become a living memorial to suffering. The house was beautiful in its cruelty. It preserved every death with perfect fidelity, ensuring that no final moment was lost to time. Rebecca was becoming its curator, its living archive. She was learning that death was not a single event but a process, unique to each individual, and the house wanted her to understand them all. On the 2-week anniversary of her moving in, Rebecca experienced her first violent death. She felt the impact of the blunt object against her skull, felt her brain swelling against the confines of her cranium. The 1923 murder of Catherine Whitmore, beaten to death by her husband in a jealous rage. The physical pain was overwhelming, but worse was the emotional trauma, betrayal, the disbelief, the desperate love that persisted even as her husband's hand brought down the candlestick again and again. Rebecca woke with tears streaming down her face, her body unmarked but her soul bearing the weight of Catherine's final moments. She understood now that the house was more than a repository of death. It was a testament to the human capacity for suffering, a monument to the complexity of ending. She tried to leave, packed her bags, loaded her car, drove to the end of the driveway. but something pulled her back, a magnetic force that she couldn't resist. The house needed her. The deaths needed a witness, and she was already changing, becoming something more than herself, something that could carry the weight of all those final moments. The next death was her own aunt's, the cancer that had eaten through her body over the course of 2 years, the slow dissolution of organ systems, the morphine that couldn't quite mask the pain. Rebecca felt every moment of Millicent's decline, understood now why her aunt had chosen to face death in this house, despite better medical care being available elsewhere. Millicent had been the house's memory keeper for 50 years. She had carried the weight of all those deaths, had become their living monument, and now it was Rebecca's turn to take up that burden, to become the bridge between the living and the dead. She stopped trying to leave. She stopped questioning the purpose of her inheritance. She understood now that she had been chosen, that the house had called to her across the years, preparing her for this role. She was becoming part of something larger than herself, something that ensured no death would ever be forgotten. The house continued to share its collection with her, each death a lesson in the infinite varieties of human suffering. She experienced them all with growing acceptance, even a kind of gratitude. She was witnessing the full spectrum of human experience, from the peaceful deaths of the elderly to the tragic ends of children, from the noble deaths of those who sacrificed themselves for others to the ignoble deaths of those who had lived selfishly. She began to understand that the house was not cruel but compassionate. It was ensuring that every person who had died within its walls was remembered, that their final moments were preserved and honored. She was becoming their voice, their witness, their living memorial. Rebecca stopped keeping track of the deaths she experienced. They blended together into a symphony of endings, each one unique but part of a greater composition. She was learning the music of mortality, becoming fluent in the language of last breaths and final heartbeats. The house had found its perfect curator in her. She would carry their deaths until her own came, and then another would take her place, continuing the chain of memory and witness that stretched back to the house's founding. She was no longer just Rebecca. She was the keeper of endings, the guardian of final moments, the living repository of all the house's accumulated grief. And in accepting that role, she had found her true purpose to ensure that no death would ever be forgotten, that every ending would be remembered and honored. The house settled around her with satisfaction, its collection of deaths safe in her capable hands. She was home at last, surrounded by the whispers of the departed, carrying their final moments like precious treasures. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Emma had always preferred the night shift. While her colleagues complained about the disrupted sleep schedules and the way darkness seemed to amplify every shadow, she found comfort in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn. The corridors of Sunset Manor were peaceful then, broken only by the soft wheeze of oxygen concentrators and the distant hum of medical equipment. It was during these hours that she could truly focus on her patients, providing the kind of personal care that was impossible during the chaos of day shifts. Sunset Manor had been operating for 37 years, a mid-sized facility that prided itself on providing dignified care for the elderly. The building itself was unremarkable, series of connected wings that had been expanded over the decades to accommodate a growing population of residents. Emma had worked there for 18 months, long enough to know which floorboards creaked and which residents were likely to be awake at any given hour. The facility housed 83 residents, ranging from those who were relatively independent to others who required round-the-clock care. Emma's shift typically began at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m., during which time she would make her rounds, distribute medications, and respond to call lights. It was routine work, but Emma found meaning in the small moments helping Mrs. Rodriguez get comfortable, listening to Mr. Chen's stories about his youth in Shanghai, ensuring that Mrs. Patterson's arthritis pain was manageable. The first unusual incident occurred on a Tuesday night in October. Emma was completing her 2 a.m. rounds when she noticed that the call light was illuminated outside room 237. Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez, 91 years old, admitted 3 months ago with advanced dementia. Emma knocked softly and entered the room, expecting to find the elderly woman disoriented or in need of assistance to the bathroom. Instead, she found Mrs. Vasquez sitting upright in bed, perfectly still, her eyes wide open and staring directly at the doorway. The woman's mouth was stretched in an impossibly wide smile, the corners of her lips pulled back to reveal teeth that seemed too large for her face. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, and she didn't move when Emma entered. "Mrs. Vasquez?" Emma approached the bed cautiously. "Are you all right?" Your call light was on. The woman didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the doorway, unblinking, while that terrible smile stretched across her face. Emma reached out to check her pulse and jerked her hand back. The skin was cold, far too cold for a living person. Emma checked for breathing, for any signs of life, but found none. Mrs. Vasquez had died, probably hours ago. But she was sitting upright, positioned as if she were alertly waiting for something. Emma had seen enough deaths to know that bodies didn't arrange themselves this way naturally. Someone had moved her, positioned her, created this disturbing tableau. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, nothing unusual for someone of Mrs. Vasquez's age and condition. But Emma couldn't shake the image of that smile, the way the woman's eyes had seemed to track her movement despite the absence of life behind them. 3 nights later, it happened again. Mr. Harold Winters, room 211, call light illuminated at 3:17 a.m. Emma found him in the same position, sitting upright in bed, eyes wide open, mouth stretched in that same impossible smile. His body was cold, lifeless, but arranged with deliberate care. This time, Emma noticed something else. The man's lips were moving, just slightly, producing a wet clicking sound that might have been an attempt at speech. She leaned closer, trying to understand what he was trying to communicate, but the sounds were unintelligible, just wet clicks and gasps from vocal cords that should no longer function. "Mr. Winters?" she whispered. "Are you trying to tell me something?" The clicking sounds intensified, and Emma realized with growing horror that the dead man was trying to speak. His mouth moved with determined effort, producing sounds that gradually began to form recognizable patterns. Words, or something close to words, emerging from lips that should have been silent forever. "Emma." The voice was barely a whisper, thick with fluid and decay. "Emma, listen." Emma stumbled backward, her heart pounding. Dead people didn't speak. Dead people didn't sit up in bed and call her by name. But Mr. Winters continued his wet, clicking attempts at communication, his wide eyes fixed on her with desperate intensity. "They hurt us." Each word was a struggle, accompanied by the sound of air moving through damaged vocal cords. "They kill us for money." Emma ran from the room, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. She spent the rest of her shift in the nurse's station, jumping at every sound, every shadow. When the day shift arrived, she reported both deaths but said nothing about the circumstances in which she had found the bodies. The pattern continued. Over the next 2 weeks, Emma discovered 4 more residents who had died during her shift, each one found in the same disturbing position. Sitting upright, eyes wide open, mouths stretched in that terrible smile, and each one tried to communicate with her, their dead vocal cords producing wet, desperate sounds that gradually formed words. They were all trying to tell her the same thing: they had been murdered. Mrs. Henderson, who had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, whispered that someone had disconnected her oxygen while she slept. Mr. Garcia, who had died of an apparent stroke, claimed that his medication had been replaced with something that stopped his heart. Mrs. Thompson, found dead of natural causes, insisted that someone had held a pillow over her face until she stopped breathing. Emma tried to rationalize what she was experiencing: grief, stress, the natural paranoia that came with working night shifts in a place where death was a constant presence. But the voices of the dead were too specific, too consistent. They were trying to warn her about something, to reveal a truth that the living couldn't or wouldn't see. She began to pay closer attention to the day shift reports, the death certificates, the patterns of mortality in the facility. Sunset Manor had a higher death rate than comparable facilities, but not dramatically so. The deaths were all attributed to natural cause heart failure, stroke, complications from existing conditions. Nothing that would raise suspicions or trigger an investigation. But the dead residents continued to speak to her, their chorus of wet whispers growing with each passing night. They told her about the night staff who entered their rooms after Emma had completed her rounds, about injections that stopped their hearts, about pillows pressed over their faces until they stopped struggling. They spoke of a systematic campaign of murder carried out by people who saw the residents as nothing more than financial burdens. Emma began investigating discreetly, reviewing medical records and insurance files. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Many of the residents who had died during her shifts had been behind on their payments, or their insurance benefits were about to expire. Others had been scheduled for expensive medical procedures that would have cut into the facility's profit margins. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable when she knew what to look for. The revelation came on a Friday night in November. Emma was making her rounds when she heard voices coming from the medication room. Dr. Kellerman, the night physician, and Marcus Webb, the senior night aide, discussing something in hushed tones. Emma crept closer, straining to hear their conversation. "Mrs. Morrison's insurance runs out next week. Dr. Kellerman was saying, her family can't afford private pay, and Medicaid won't cover her level of care. She's taking up a bed we could fill with a more profitable patient." "Same method as the others?" Marcus asked, his voice casual, as if they were discussing meal preferences rather than murder. "Insulin overdose should do it. Make sure you wait until Emma's finished her rounds. We can't afford to have her asking questions." Emma's hands trembled as she backed away from the door. Mrs. Morrison, a sweet woman with early-stage Alzheimer's who still recognized her grandchildren when they visited. They were planning to kill her for no reason other than financial convenience. But as Emma retreated down the hallway, she heard another voice, a wet, clicking whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Emma. The voice was familiar. Mr. Winters, the man she had found weeks ago, the first to speak to her from beyond death. "You know now." She turned toward his old room, room 211, which had been empty since his death. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, she could see a figure sitting on the edge of the bed. Winters, exactly as she had found him that night, his mouth stretched in that terrible smile, his eyes wide and aware. "They killed us, all." His voice was clearer now, as if death had given him time to practice speaking. "Insurance, money, profit, margins." Emma approached the room with growing dread. "How are you here? How are you speaking? Death is not the end." Mr. Winters stood from the bed, his movements stiff but deliberate. "Not when there is unfinished business." Other figures began to appear in the hallway. Mrs. Vasquez, Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Garcia, all the residents who had died during Emma's shifts. They moved with the same stiff deliberation, their faces bearing that same impossible smile, their eyes bright with purpose that death hadn't extinguished. "We need justice." Mrs. Vasquez's voice joined the chorus, her words accompanied by the wet sounds of decay. "We need witnesses. You can help us." Mr. Garcia added, his head tilting at an unnatural angle. "You can speak for us." Emma realized with growing horror that she was surrounded by the murdered dead, all of them focused on her with desperate intensity. Their presence filled the hallway with the smell of antiseptic and decay, and their collective whispers created a sound like wind through dry leaves. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Join us." The voices spoke in unison now, a chorus of the murdered dead. "Help us. Stop them." Emma backed toward the nurse's station, but the dead residents followed her, their movements becoming more coordinated, more purposeful. She could see through their flesh now, could see the decay beneath their skin, but their eyes remained bright with an intelligence that death hadn't dimmed. "We can teach you." Mrs. Henderson's voice was the clearest of all, her words forming with liquid precision. "Teach you to cross over. Teach you to be like us." The dead residents began to close in around her, their hands reaching out with longing that transcended the physical realm. Emma understood that they wanted her to die, to join their chorus of voices, to become another witness to the murders that continued night after night. "You will help us." Mr. Winters spoke directly into her ear, his breath cold against her skin. "You will speak with our voice." Emma felt something changing inside her, a coldness spreading through her chest that felt like the beginning of death. The voices of the murdered residents were growing louder, more insistent, and she realized they were somehow pulling her toward their realm, drawing her life force into their collective consciousness. She tried to run, but her legs felt heavy, unresponsive. The dead residents surrounded her completely now, their hands touching her arms, her shoulders, her face. Each touch brought with it a flood of memories, their final moments, their terror, their realization that the people they trusted were killing them for profit. "Feel what we felt." Mrs. Vasquez pressed her cold hand against Emma's chest. "Know what we know." Emma experienced their deaths one by one, the injection that stopped Mrs. Henderson's heart, the pillow held over Mr. Garcia's face, the insulin overdose that killed Mrs. Thompson. She felt their confusion, their betrayal, their desperate desire for justice that had kept them tethered to the physical world. But as she absorbed their experiences, Emma began to understand something else. The dead residents weren't just seeking justice, they were building an army. Each new murder victim joined their ranks, adding their voice to the chorus of the dead. They were creating a supernatural force powerful enough to stop the killings, but only if they had someone who could bridge the gap between their world and the world of the living. "We need you to cross over." The voices were becoming overwhelming now, filling Emma's mind with their collective will. "We need you to speak for us." Emma felt her heartbeat slowing, felt her breathing becoming shallow. The dead residents were drawing her into their realm, making her one of them. But as darkness began to creep in around the edges of her vision, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Dr. Kellerman and Marcus Webb were approaching, probably wondering why Emma wasn't at the nurse's station. They couldn't see the dead residents surrounding her to them. She would appear to be having some kind of medical emergency. "What the hell?" Dr. Kellerman's voice cut through the supernatural whispers. "Marcus, call an ambulance. She's having a seizure or something." But the dead residents weren't finished with Emma. Their hands tightened on her arms, their voices becoming more urgent. "Don't let them save you," Mr. Winters whispered directly into her mind. "Stay with us. Help us. Stop them." Emma realized with crystalline clarity that she was at a crossroads. She could let the dead residents pull her completely into their realm, becoming another voice in their supernatural chorus. She would gain the power to stop the murders, but at the cost of her own life, Or she could fight back, return to the living world, but remain powerless to prevent the systematic killing of vulnerable residents. The choice was taken from her when Marcus Webb reached out to check her pulse. The moment his fingers touched her wrist, the connection with the dead residents was broken. They vanished like smoke, leaving Emma gasping on the floor of the hallway while Dr. Kellerman and Marcus Webb knelt beside her. "Get her to the break room," Dr. Kellerman ordered. "Probably just exhaustion. These night shifts can be rough on new employees." But as they helped Emma to her feet, she could still hear the whispers of the dead residents, fainter now but still present. They hadn't given up on recruiting her. They would return, again and again, until she made a choice. Over the following weeks, Emma tried to function normally, but the dead residents made it impossible. They appeared to her constantly in reflections, in shadows, in the corners of her vision. Their whispers followed her everywhere, a constant reminder of the murders that continued under the cover of night. She witnessed Dr. Kellerman and Marcus Webb kill Mrs. Morrison exactly as they had planned, using an insulin overdose to simulate diabetic shock. She watched them dispose of evidence, falsify medical records, and comfort the grieving family with practiced sympathy. And that night, Mrs. Morrison joined the chorus of the dead, her voice adding to the supernatural symphony that only Emma could hear. "Join us." The collective voice was growing stronger with each new death. "Help us. Stop them." Emma began to understand that the dead residents were offering her something more than just membership in their supernatural army. They were offering her purpose, meaning the chance to become something greater than herself. She would lose her human life, but she would gain the power to speak for those who could no longer speak for themselves. The decision became easier when she realized that Dr. Kellerman and Marcus Webb had noticed her suspicious behavior. They were planning to eliminate her, to make her another accidental death that would be attributed to stress or a previously undiagnosed medical condition. "She knows too much," she overheard Dr. Kellerman telling Marcus. "We can't risk her talking to the authorities. Make it look like suicidal depression from working too many night shifts." That night, as Emma made her final rounds, the dead residents appeared to her one last time, but now their message was different. "Choose," they whispered in unison. "Choose to join us. Choose to help us. Choose to speak for us." Emma looked around at the faces of the murdered residents, saw the determination in their dead eyes, felt the power of their collective will. She thought about all the vulnerable people sleeping in their beds, trusting that the medical staff would protect them, not knowing that they were being systematically murdered for profit. "Yes," she whispered, "I choose to join you." The dead residents smiled their terrible smiles and reached out to her with hands that no longer belonged to the physical world. Emma felt the coldness spreading through her body, felt her connection to the living world beginning to fade, but instead of fear, she felt relief. She was choosing to become something more than human, something that could bridge the gap between the dead and the living. As her heart stopped beating, as her breathing ceased, Emma felt herself joining the chorus of the murdered dead. She retained her consciousness, her personality, but gained something more: the collective strength of all those who had been killed, the supernatural power to seek justice for the innocent. When the day shift arrived, they found Emma's body in the break room, apparently dead from a brain aneurysm. Dr. Kellerman expressed appropriate grief and filed all the necessary paperwork. Marcus Webb comforted the other staff members and spoke eloquently about the stresses of night shift work. But that night, when Dr. Kellerman and Marcus Webb returned to continue their murderous routine, they found Emma waiting for them. She sat in the nurse's station, her eyes wide open, her mouth stretched in that familiar, impossible smile. "Hello," she said, her voice carrying the wet, clicking sounds of the dead. "We need to talk." Behind her stood the chorus of the murdered dead. their collective voice finally strong enough to speak for justice. Emma had become their leader, their spokesperson, the bridge between their supernatural realm and the world of the living. The murders at Sunset Manor ended that night, but not through any conventional means. Dr. Kellerman and Marcus Webb simply disappeared, their fate known only to the dead residents who had finally found their voice. Emma continued to work the night shift, though in a very different capacity than before. She protected the vulnerable residents, ensured that their final days were peaceful, and served as guardian against those who would prey upon the innocent. The living staff learned not to ask too many questions about the strange occurrences on the night shift, about the voices that seemed to whisper through the halls, about the way patients who died naturally always seemed to pass peacefully, as if protected by some benevolent presence. Emma had found her true calling at last, speaking for those who could no longer speak for themselves, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, ensuring that justice would always have a voice, even from beyond the grave. The night shift was finally in good hands. And so our 3 tales of inherited terror come to an end. But the question remains, what have you inherited tonight? Perhaps it's the creeping certainty that every photograph holds secrets, every pixel could hide something watching you. Maybe it's the knowledge that old houses remember everything, and some memories are too painful to bear alone. Or could it be the understanding that death is not always the end, and sometimes the dead have unfinished business that demands a price from the living? These stories will follow you now, settling into the quiet corners of your mind. They'll whisper when you scroll through family photos, when you walk through inherited spaces, when you hear footsteps in the corridors of care. The inheritance of fear is complete. You carry these nightmares with you now, and like all true inheritances, they can never be returned. Thank you for watching another descent into darkness with us. If these tales have chilled your soul and left you craving more nightmares, please subscribe to Nightmare House of Horror. Ring that notification bell so you never miss when we open another door to terror. Leave a comment below telling us which inheritance of fear affected you most. The door is always open for your return. But remember, every time you enter, you leave carrying something new. Sweet dreams. If you can manage them, the house always has more rooms to explore and more horrors to inherit.